Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. There are many questions to be asked and answered around what does it all mean that the leaking of a review of the Roe versus Wade documents, what does it all mean? Does it mean that Roe versus Wade, the decision is going to topple? Does it mean that they're just reviewing it and that in the end it'll still stand? What are the actions that should be taken by the Biden administration to ensure that the rights of women are supported, especially on healthcare issues? What does it mean if Roe versus Wade should fall? What does it mean for others' rights, the LGBTQ rights? There's a lot of questions to be answered for those who are marginalized within our society, those who are not of exactly the norm. What does it mean when we look at racism and the fact that a new anti-lynching act is put in place? Is someone going to go after and attack that, try to tear that down? There's a lot of questions to be answered with this as far as rights and the protection of human rights with documentations in the court. The White House press secretary is going to try to give us some answers as to what the President Biden is actually thinking and what policy and maneuverability through the Senate and Congress will actually be in order to ensure that human rights and rights of women are upheld. In another statement, Justin Trudeau is asked a question about what is happening in the United States, and he assures that women's rights to abortion and other healthcare needs will be protected and supported in Canada. And there is no question at all about what is happening in Canada versus what is happening in the United States. Moving on to the United Nations, there are complications with Nigeria, Yemen, and other topics. Well, one of the big topics, of course, is still going to be the Ukraine. And what about peace talks when the Ukraine is receiving shipments of arms from Canada, U.S., and Poland? What about other things like sanctions when we listen to today's show, when we consider that Eastern European countries like Hungary are sitting on the fence with sanctions? How is that going to affect the type of war that Vladimir Putin is going to be able to wage against the Ukraine and President Zelensky? So let's listen to today's show as we start with the press secretary in the White House.
Just two items to highlight for all of you at the top. Two short items. Today, we announced an upcoming conference on hunger, nutrition, and health. This will bring attention to the burden of hunger and diet-related disease, which were exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. At the conference, we will release a new national strategy to eliminate hunger and reduce diet-related illnesses such as heart disease and eliminate disparities. The strategy will catalyze the public and private sectors around a coordinated strategy to accelerate progress and drive transformative change in the United States. Also, I know the President spoke about this morning, but I just wanted to lightly touch on the fact that during the President's first year in office, the deficit fell by over $350 billion. Again, fell by over $350 billion. And that announcement this morning, his remarks were based on the Treasury Department's revised estimates of the government's financing needs for this fiscal year. The Treasury Department also announced, the President touched on it this morning, that it will pay down the national debt this quarter for the first time since 2016. So I just wanted to note those items, and then Amar, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks. I had just a couple on related to the Alito draft opinion that leaked. First is, does the President believe that Justice Kavanaugh and Gorsuch misled or lied to senators about their views on Roe?
Well, again, given that while the Supreme Court has validated the document, they have made clear that this is not a final opinion. So the President, I don't have anything to speak to in terms of his views on where members may or may not be, or Supreme Court justices, I should say, may or may not be on a final opinion.
And secondly, President Biden again this morning warned that the draft abortion opinion could go beyond the issue and jeopardize other basic rights. And I think this morning he specifically talked about LGBTQ issues, if I remember correctly. Does he want the court, does he think that this opinion needs to be, at minimum, narrowed?
Well, again, the President, as much as he spoke yesterday, both in a written statement and also to all of you who are traveling about his strong views about this leaked document, he's not going to prejudge or have a comment on an opinion that has not yet been issued. What he was speaking to, and he touched on it again this morning, was his long history working on a range of these issues. As you all know from his biography, he led the fight against the nomination of Robert Bork, and what struck him in reading the leaked document was how some of the language reminded him of Robert Bork's view of the narrow definition of how one should analyze or review what the Constitution allows for. And if you remember during those hearings, I know many of you, including myself, were quite young during the time, but we all read history. Part of the big debate there, or the big discussion, was the Griswold versus Connecticut case, which was related to privacy and whether married couples should be able to have the privacy to purchase contraception. And so I think what you're hearing play out is the President's own reaction to what he saw in these documents and his view that the protection of privacy and the protection of the ability of women to make decisions about their health care with their doctors, about people to be able to choose who they marry, and to him reading that reminded him of how important those protections are, and that's why you continue to hear him talk about it.
Finally, if I could just ask briefly on Chairman Powell. He just said that the Fed is limited in how it can deal with supply shocks that have been leading to higher inflation. So what more can the White House and Congress do given that challenge?
Well, I would note also, as you and others have reported, that there were announcements made about decisions, actions the Federal Reserve intends to take, which are consistent with what they have said they would do to date. And the President has said in the past that it's appropriate, and he supports their decision to recalibrate. So that remains his view today. In terms of what more we can do to address inflation, I mean, I would also note that during his comments, Chair Powell also noted the strength of the economy. He also noted that there's a path for a soft landing without pushing the economy into recession. He had a lot to say, of course, during this press conference, so I just wanted to note a couple of the things. But what more we can do beyond, of course, respecting the independence of the Federal Reserve and the decisions they make, including those announced today, is to continue to take steps to address costs for the American people. Chair Powell also said, or echoed, I think it was in response to a question, the point that energy prices, and specifically the invasion by President Putin, was having an impact on inflation. And so one of the president's primary focuses right now, as you all know, is taking any step we can to bring down costs, whether that is the historic release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, leading the world in their own release, continuing to talk to large global providers of oil and what they can do to help the global market, even the announcements we've made over the last couple of weeks about E15, and taking any step we can to reduce those costs, and also continuing to have conversations with leaders on Capitol Hill and members about steps we can take to reduce costs for the American people, whether it's childcare, healthcare, elder care, prescription drugs. All of these have an impact on people's day-to-day lives. Go ahead.
Back to abortion, if I can. Yesterday you said the leak raises eyebrows, including for many here in the White House. But does the White House explicitly condemn this leak, or has seeing this draft been seen as welcome by some here?
I don't think we have a particular view on that other than to say that we certainly note the unprecedented nature of it. What we are mindful of, and I spoke with the president about exactly this question yesterday, and obviously it's up to the Department of Justice to determine what, if any, action they will take. And I know, obviously, there have been calls for that from some Republicans, but also members of the Supreme Court. But our focus is on not losing sight from what the content is in the draft and what is at risk here. And while we have heard a number raise concerns about the leak, our focus is on highlighting what the content in there would put at risk for women across the country. So again, we'll leave it to the Department of Justice to make a decision about that. I would note that many Republicans have wanted to talk about that and not about whether they support the protection of a woman's right to choose, a woman's right to make decisions with her doctor about her health care. Maybe not a surprise, given by more than a 2-to-1 margin, Americans want the Supreme Court to support abortion rights.
As for the content of the draft, the document, the draft, it is, of course, a draft. But if the Supreme Court does move to strike down Roe, should Americans be prepared to accept that decision as legitimate, and would President Biden accept that decision as legitimate?
Well, I can't speak for what actions could be possible on the legal front. I would point you to the Department of Justice on that. But what I can tell you will happen is, and this is what we are preparing for the possibility of, that if Roe were to fall, abortion would probably be illegal in about half the states in the country, up to 26 states, particularly in the South, the Midwest, and West, who have all spoken out, many leaders, about how they're poised to restrict or ban access. Some have even taken action, even as recently as yesterday, as crazy as that sounds. And depending on the court's decision, 13 states even have trigger laws. Trigger laws mean they would basically immediately put in place bans. And as a result of all of this, tens of millions of women may lack access to reproductive health care services as soon as this summer, if that were a decision to be made. I'd also note, and as we're thinking about and working with not just the Gender Policy Council, but also the Department of Health and Human Services, also members on the Hill, also the Council's office, what we're really focused on is the impact this would have. It would dramatically reduce access to reproductive care, particularly for women with low incomes, women of color, women in rural communities. We know that 75% of those seeking abortions are living at or below 200% of the poverty level. And the majority of patients seeking abortions identify as Black, Hispanic, and AAPI. So if you look at the 26 states, let's take, for example, or the 13 to 26, depending, and you look at a map, that means that women, the majority of whom are below that poverty level and are Black, Hispanic, or AAPI, are going to be forced to figure out how to travel, how to take time off of work, how to get childcare. It is a prohibitive cost. It will not be safe, and that is what we are focused on working to address as we're making policy decisions and considerations.
It sounds like you're saying then that's a yes, he would consider this a legitimate decision.
Well, there is not even a decision yet. We don't know the validity of we know that this is a leaked document. It is not the final opinion, so I just can't speak to that hypothetically at this point in time. Go ahead.
Jen, just following up on that, in the President's statement yesterday, he said he had asked the Gender Policy Council and the White House Counsel's Office to look at options. What can the administration do if that's what the decision ends up being in June?
Well, the reason I noted all of what I just did, Jeff, is because we're really looking at who this would directly impact the most. Of course, there is the overwhelming majority of women in this country do not want this to be overturned. But the impact directly will be predominantly on women of color, will be on the 75% of those seeking abortions who are living at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. So while I can't at this point give you a preview of what we would do in response to a hypothetical final opinion, what I can tell you is that we've already seen states restrict, right, across the country. And if you look at Texas, for example, they put their restrictions in place, and Planned Parenthood and other organizations have put out statistics suggesting that clinics in neighboring states have seen increases of 600, 700, 800% of people traveling to their clinics. So you will see that. You will see people try to travel to states. And what we've done to date, and try to help to date where we've seen restrictions, which gives you kind of a tiny bit of a roadmap, even though it would obviously be much more expanded beyond this, is created, for example, the Dire Need Grant Awards, which provide funding to expand access to emergency contraception, family planning services. We just announced $6.6 million in awards made to 8 grantees across the country and around the country. We also have, I would note, the Department of Justice and the Attorney General's statements in response to Texas SB 8, which again is an example of what we've seen in terms of the impact to date, and their commitment to continuing to defend the law to protect the safety of patients seeking access to reproductive health services. HHS has also announced a 3-pronged department-wide response to protect patients and providers. So again, what we're looking at is how to ensure we're expanding access, how to ensure we are taking a look at the enormous impact on a specific portion of the population, and this is a cross-government effort beyond just the Gender Policy Council.
Breaking news on that? Sorry, go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, would that manifest itself in executive orders, or what specifically might the framework for that kind of action be?
We're not there yet. Obviously, what we've done to date, Jeff, is taken steps through, obviously, the Department of Justice, which they can speak to, through grant programs and funding programs that we've been able to put in place to date to address even restrictions that are in states to date, which is not the same as the Supreme Court overturning, and we will build on that from here. What was the breaking news?
We just learned that the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has tested positive for COVID via PCR test. If you could walk us through what more you know about that. We've received a statement from the State Department, but most notably, the most recent time he was face-to-face with the President and the circumstances.
He has not seen the President in several days, and he is not considered a close contact. I would remind you all, that's a strange phrase, I know, but close contact as defined by the CDC is being within 10 feet for 15 minutes. That is not 6 feet, 6 feet for 15 minutes. He has not been and has not seen him in several days.
So for clarity, because we're learning about a lot of cases right now, it's not the first time Washington's seen these ricochet. It's been going on for several weeks. Has the President been identified as a close contact to anybody who has just tested positive for COVID?
If he had, we would have announced that publicly to all of you. And we have clearly made decisions when it has been cabinet members, or even when it's been people who play a public role with all of you. We have made announcements out of an abundance of transparency.
So for transparency purposes, we know he has tested negative recently. When was the most recent negative test?
He tested negative yesterday. The President.
And then finally, in terms of preventive medications right now, can you say declaratively, is the President taking any pre-exposure preventive medications to deal with COVID?
He is not. The preventative medication that has been approved by the FDA is Evusheld, which is given to people who are immunocompromised, and he is not immunocompromised.
Also not taking Bebtelovimab or something?
I'm not aware of any medication he is taking.
Jen?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Several days since Blinken last saw the President, do you know what day exactly that was?
I'm sure we can get you the exact day.
And to follow on Jeff's questions, when it comes to the options that the President has said he's directed his team to prepare, should we not expect to see those options until this ruling comes down from the Supreme Court?
That's correct. That's what I would expect.
Do you not think it would be too late to unveil the options then, given it seems imminent that this is the direction that the Supreme Court is headed in?
Well, again, we don't have a final conclusion. The Supreme Court themselves made clear this is not the final opinion. So we are already working a great deal behind the scenes, and we will have more to say if and when there is a final. There will be at some point, but when there's a final opinion.
And a question about something Senator Manchin said today. He said he believes inflation will be the #1 driving factor in the midterms, not abortion, not this potential ruling from the Supreme Court. Does the White House see it that way?
I mean, all we can judge it based on is what we've seen in public polls. That remains the data to date, right? But obviously the news of yesterday just came out yesterday.
And today the president was sharply critical of the MAGA crowd and the MAGA agenda. Is that what we should expect to be his message going into the midterms?
Well, I think for those of you who've been covering him for some time, you've heard him say, and maybe back more to the campaign trail, less as president, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And I would expect you will hear him with that mantra much more out there over the next coming months. He has been struck clearly because he has talked about this, as you mentioned, Caitlin, this morning, and he also has made comments over the last several days about the direction of some in the Republican Party, the MAGA direction of some in the Republican Party, and he's been struck by the hold his predecessor seems to have on far too many members, not all, but far too many members of the party. And what we're seeing, the latest antics, make clear that they are at war with Mickey Mouse. They're against allowing women to make choices about their own health care, against lowering the cost of prescription drugs. And if that remains their platform, the president's view is that is out of whack with the mainstream of the country. Now, at the same time, he's always believed that in working with Republicans in good faith and finding ways to do that. And he will continue to do that. But he is going to also call out, and you will see him call out more, places where he feels there are extreme policies and extreme comments and extreme positions that are unfortunately overtaking far too much of the party.
And you just said his predecessor. Today he seemed to purposefully say my predecessor. He did not say Trump. He said MAGA instead of Trump. Is that deliberate?
Well, as far as I know, he's not on the ballot. A number of his of Republicans who have seemed to be under the whim of his predecessor are, so that's who he's going to focus his efforts on.
Quick question about interest rates with the Fed's action today. As interest rates go up, the cost of carrying the national debt also increases. Interest payments go up.
Yeah.
Are there any concern about possible complications with the president keeping his deficit reduction pledge? The cost of paying interest on the national debt is going to go up as interest rates go up.
I have not heard that concern expressed by our economic team. We are proud of the announcement made this morning, hence the president spoke to it, and taking additional steps to reduce the deficit remain his commitment. So I have not heard that concern from them.
Other question. Axios is reporting that in his meeting with Mark and Deborah Tice earlier this week, the president pledged to directly engage with Syria to try to secure Austin's release. Is that true?
Well, I would note that our hostage negotiator, our Roger Carstens, that is the type of work that he does and will continue to do. Go ahead.
Thanks. Jen, why did you guys say anything about the leaked draft memo at the Supreme Court?
How do you mean?
Well, in the past, you have declined to comment on leaked materials, so why now?
Well, Peter, I think as you would note and was reported, the Supreme Court confirmed this document was accurate, even if it is not the final opinion.
The president had a statement out before they confirmed that it was real. So
and in that
changed?
statement, he made clear, we don't know if this is accurate. We don't know if this document is accurate or the leak is accurate.
And to follow up on a question earlier, does the president think the leaker should be punished?
Again, that's up for the Department of Justice and others to determine. What our focus is on is not getting our distracted or our eye off the ball of what is most important to people across the country here, which is not the leak and the story of the leak. It is the fact that women's health care is at risk for millions of people across this country.
The president said today, what happens if you have states change the law saying that children who are LGBTQ can't be in classrooms with other children? What is he talking about?
Well, I think, Peter, we've seen extreme laws that target LGBTQ families. their kids across the country. And I think what he's saying is we don't know what they're capable of given what they've already done to date.
Which state is trying to segregate LGBTQ children in the classroom?
Well, I think we've seen laws that are incredibly discriminatory. That's what the president's referring to. And the fact that he doesn't know what additional steps could be taken by extreme wings of the party that would rather divide rather than work on issues that the American people actually are focused on and actually impacting them.
So another one about abortion. Why is the president talking about the judgment to choose to abort a child?
Well, the president's view on a woman's right to make choices about her own health care is well known, well documented, well stated.
He said abort a child.
I understand, Peter, but what I'm telling you is what his position is.
And how can you guys say this is not a political issue when the president's statement about this talked about getting pro-choice officials elected?
Did I say it's not a political issue?
Yes, you actually said some call it a political issue. It is not. Abort Air
Well,
Force One.
because the vast majority of the public believes that this should not be overturned, meaning I meant to say it's not a partisan issue, and I don't think it is. There are many Republican and independent men across the country who do not believe the Supreme Court should overturn a woman's right to make choices about her own health care. In fact, only 30% in recent polls thought they should. So that's what I'm referring to. Go ahead.
Jen, thanks. A couple on the Roe opinion. Earlier this year, President Biden made a speech on voting rights. He said they were under attack. It was important to do that. Will he make an address to the nation on abortion access?
I don't have anything to predict about an address to the country. I can tell you that you've heard him speak about his views today and yesterday, and it's only been 2 days since we saw the leaked documents.
And on the comments today and yesterday, when he was asked about abortion, the president really focused on privacy, LGBT children, married couples. Why isn't he speaking more directly about how this impacts women, poor women, women of color? How comfortable is he talking about this?
He has. He did yesterday, both in his written statement and when he addressed this publicly. His point, as he's continued to talk about this over 2 days, is also that this brings into question our fundamental rights and the fundamental rights of people across this country on who they marry, what choices they make about their own health care. And that goes to his own experience fighting against, again, Robert Bork in his nomination many years ago.
And he's not used the word abortion.
It was in his statement yesterday.
Until yesterday. That's my question. Is he hadn't used the word abortion until yesterday. Why did he want to use it yesterday, and what should we take from that?
When he talks about his commitment to protecting a woman's right to choose women's health care, he's referring to protecting a woman's right to have an abortion. I think most people know that. Go ahead.
Jen, yesterday the president was giving a speech, and when he was talking about the CHIPS bill, he said that the Chinese Communist Party was lobbying folks to oppose the bill. I'm wondering what you guys saw to sort of add that. It was a new line in his speech, what you saw, and what some of the examples of them sort of interfering with our domestic legislative process.
I think what he's referring to is the fact that it's been well reported, maybe even by Bloomberg, I don't know, I'd have to check, that the Chinese Communist Party is opposed to this legislation. And that's what he's referring to. And, he believes, as you know, that it's absolutely critical for our national security for Congress to get this Bipartisan Innovation Act to his desk, in large part because it will help protect critical supply chains like semiconductors. It's going to strengthen our supply chains against global shocks. It's going to help out-compete the rest of the world, including China, for decades to come. So he was referring to their opposition.
But not a specific new sort of...
Right, their opposition to it, exactly.
There was an Axios report that had kind of two parts that I wanted to ask you about. First, that the trip to Israel is going to be added to the European trip in June, but also more substantively that they're considering, or you're considering a regional leader summit as part of that visit. Can you confirm either of those?
We're not quite there yet. What I will say is that you know about the trip at the end of June because there are some predetermined kind of international fora that he will be a part of. And when he spoke with Prime Minister Bennett just a couple of weeks ago, he invited him to Israel. The president accepted and said he's looking forward to coming, but we haven't quite locked in the date yet. And so I don't have any further detail at this point.
And last question, but on summits as well. The Summit of the Americas is coming up.
Yeah.
Mexico and the president had a conversation a few days ago.
Yeah.
The leader of Mexico has been pushing for countries with authoritarian governments, Cuba, Venezuela and Nicaragua to participate in that summit. And I'm wondering if you guys have come to a determination about how you're going to handle their participation at the summit yet.
I'm happy to check. I'm not sure a final determination has been made, or I will check if one has, and we can get you that information. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Building on some of the questions Catherine was
Yeah.
asking, just in regards to keeping the focus on women's rights, health rights, protecting privacy, how much of the president's efforts moving forward will be on these issues? Does it shoot to the top of the agenda? So far, it's largely been in response to the leak. How much will be proactively taken now?
Well, I would dispute that only because we haven't talked about this a lot publicly. But I would note that remember that when these states have taken actions, we have also made clear that there was work that the Gender Policy Council, that the White House Counsel's Office, the Department of Health and Human Services, obviously the Department of Justice would be taking and would be underway. And we have been in touch with leadership about this issue and the threat to Roe in both chambers, as well as the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chair Durbin, the House Women's Caucus. Yes, in the last 36 hours, but also many times in advance about that. And certainly the leaked document is going to intensify after our efforts, after the news that millions of Americans' health care is on the cusp of being thrown into turmoil. There's no question about that. But there's been work by the Gender Policy Council that's been ongoing for months. There's been work and engagement with leaders on the Hill about what can be done for months. And certainly it's going to be redoubled at this point, given the leaked document.
On that point of intensifying efforts, what will that look like? Are we talking Oval Office meetings? Will he travel on this issue? Those kind of things?
I don't have anything to predict in terms of his schedule at this point. But what I can tell you is that, as you've seen, this is an issue he has proactively talked about in the last 2 days, both of the 2 days since the document leaked. The vice president went and gave a rousing speech at Emily's List last night, but a lot of the most important work is going to happen behind the scenes, and that is going to be the work that is done across the government to determine and prepare for what steps can be taken should this final decision be made.
On Title 42, Mexico's foreign minister mentioned, I think in the last day or two, that the Biden administration is expected to present a formal set of ideas to the government on how to contain the expected rise in migration. I assume, or can you share whether the White House is working with the DHS on those set of ideas, and is there anything you can share on what those are?
Well, I would say first that, as you know, Secretary Mayorkas testified and laid out 6 very specific pillars of effort and work that we would be pursuing. And some of that, of course, is directly with countries in terms of addressing root causes, addressing actions or attempts by smugglers to take advantage of this moment, and working with the Mexican government as part of that. And the president's conversation and call was put together in order to discuss preparations for the lifting of Title 42. As part of that, the tasking was for there to be follow-up from members of our national security team, and Mexico, that's continuing, but I don't have any specifics to read out for you. That was just always intended to be the follow-up step. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. I wanted to pivot to Ukraine. Secretary Austin recently said, and I want to get the quote right, we believe that we can win, they can win if they have the right equipment, the right support. How does the administration actually define winning in Ukraine, and does it mean that every last Russian troop is out?
Well, first I would say the way that President Putin defined winning a war that he started from the beginning was taking over Ukraine, enveloping Ukraine into Russia, taking away their territorial integrity and their sovereignty. Clearly, that has not been successful. You know, he expected and was planning to be marching through the streets of Kyiv victorious next Monday. Clearly, that is not what is going to happen. He wanted this to be a moment to divide NATO, to divide the West. Clearly, that is not what is happening. We've said we want Ukraine to win. We're going to do everything we can to help Ukraine defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity and to strengthen the Ukrainians' hands on the battlefield and at the negotiating table. That's our role. And they're defending their homeland courageously and bravely from the continued attacks from the Russians. But they're going to define at the negotiating table, as we're strengthening our hand, what they consider success on the battlefield and at the negotiating table. And we're here to support their efforts.
I just want to follow up to make sure I'm clear. So if Ukraine is fine with Russia taking over the eastern part of the country, for example, is that what the U.S. would consider a win? Is that what?
The Ukrainians are going to define what a successful outcome looks like for them. But what I think is important to note and not lose sight of is how the Russians have defined this. And they have already lost by their definition. They have not taken over Ukraine. President Putin is not going to be marching down the streets of Kyiv. They will not own the territorial integrity and sovereignty of this country. They have not divided NATO. So now at this point, yes, what we're trying to do is strengthen their hand in the negotiating table, both by supplying weapons on the battlefield, and supporting them with whatever needs they have. But it is for them to define through those negotiations. Go ahead.
Two questions, abortion related. The president promised during the campaign to overturn the restrictions that the Trump administration put on the ACA's requirement that workplace insurance plans cover contraception.
Yeah.
And the agency said in August that they would initiate the rulemaking within 6 months, and that hasn't happened. Why hasn't it happened? Is it still going to happen?
It is still the president's intention. I'm happy to check on the status and why there has been any delay.
And then following up on Catherine's question on the president using the word abortion yesterday and today, just to be more specific about it, was that a conscious choice to use that word since he hadn't been using it much before? Did he specifically, now that the stakes are much higher, did he specifically start using the word abortion because of that?
No, he approved the statement, made comments of his own accord today, so I don't think there's more to analyze about it. Go ahead.
Hey, Jen. The president toured the MAGA, as you referred to. He called them an extremist group. And he also issued a statement on Ohio today, but he was talking about Shontel Brown in the Democratic primary. So my question is, what is his reaction to the Republican Senate primary, and does he view that as Trump gaining more control over the Senate and the process, potentially what happens 2 years from now?
I'm going to be very careful about getting into the midterms here. I don't make the rules. I just follow the rules from this podium. And I know the president, of course, as you noted, Jeff, made comments himself this morning about the extreme direction the Republican Party is going in. Look, I would just say our focus continues to be on highlighting the fact that congressional Republicans want to raise taxes on half of Americans, squeezing the budgets of middle-class families. If you don't believe me, you can check out Senator Scott's website. I guess he's called for that, and we certainly agree. We hope you check out his website.
Why he touring the MAGA today?
I think I answered this a little bit earlier, but I'm happy to reiterate. You know, he has been struck by the hold his predecessor seems to have on far too many members of the party. And while he has always worked in good faith, will continue to work in good faith on addressing issues the American people have, whether it is bringing down costs, expanding access to health care, and there are areas where we feel we can have continued success. Who is opposed to addressing opioids or doing more to help veterans and address burn pits? But he's still going to call out where he sees extremist actions and extremist rhetoric, and I'm just not going to get into specific outcomes of the primaries from here.
On the abortion aspect, Elizabeth Warren said she was angry by that draft opinion. Was the president angered by the draft?
I think you heard anger in his voice yesterday, for sure. Go ahead.
Jen, yesterday you said the president was still reviewing the report from his presidential commission on the Supreme Court. That was issued several months ago. I guess I'm wondering why that review is taking so long, and is there any renewed urgency on that review given the draft that we've seen leaked from the court?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the report was never meant to be recommendations. In fact, it's not recommendations. It was an analysis done by 30 legal experts with a diversity of backgrounds and diversity of views. About a range of issues, not just court expansion, but term limits and a range of issues. But it was never intended to have an outcome where he came out and said, I accept or decline recommendations. It was just a resource he was looking to have and one he appreciates and will continue to review.
Is there any renewed urgency, though, around weighing in on that report and what those experts, put together on the court since we've seen this draft come out, though?
In what aspect?
Seeing, there was a lot of discussion around term limits that was in that report. Anything about the issues that they studied specifically, and while it wasn't meant to be a recommendation, anything that the president has, claimed could be made changes to the court?
I don't have any different or new announcements or positions to announce today. His focus, and he believes all of our focus, needs to be on what we're doing to protect women's rights and women's access to health care, and that's where his efforts will be focused in the foreseeable future. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. This morning when the president was talking about the deficit, he said, my plan to continue reducing the deficit, and he rattled off a couple of agenda items, including prescription drug reform, tax incentives for green energy, changes to the tax code, some pieces of the old Build Back Better.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, what is the president's plan to getting that through the Senate, given the narrowing legislative window for this year?
To continue having conversations about it that we don't talk about publicly, and encouraging members to have conversations with each other to see if we can come to a point where we have 50 votes to support a package moving forward.
At this point, it doesn't seem like that's the case, given that Senator Manchin is off with, trying to do a climate bill through a bipartisan working group, and Senator Sinema continues to oppose changes to the tax code. So
I think there's a lot happening behind the scenes in Congress that people are declining to talk about. Go ahead.
Hi, Jen. Thank you. 2 questions, please. The MAGA crowd, as you call them today, this was almost half the people who voted in 2020. Does the president ever feel that maybe he could have done more early on to try and reach out to those people? And does the extreme rhetoric basically signal that there's no going back now, and they're sort of out of beyond the pale for him? And yeah.
I think what the president will be judged by Americans by his actions and what he does to make their lives better. And the point he's making is that there are the platform of and the policies of far too many of these Republicans, these MAGA Republicans, as he refers to them, follow the whims of calling out Mickey Mouse and opposing policies that will help make the lives better of many, many Americans who may have voted for Trump, may have been independent, may be Democrats, including lowering the cost of prescription drugs, lowering the cost of elder care, doing more to expand access to health care. And his view is that a lot of these policy positions and the rhetoric is extreme, and that follows what we saw a pattern of by his predecessor. But he is going to continue to look for ways to work together with Republicans in good faith where there's opportunity, and he believes you can do both.
Thank you. Totally different question on sanctions. I know he said that he's going to be discussing that this week, and
yeah.
Not much left of the week. Is Patriarch Kirill a possible target of sanctions? And more generally, if you don't want to comment on that, does the president ever talk about Patriarch Kirill? I mean, he's a religious man, and he's obviously keenly interested in other countries' religions. He's emerged as a pretty remarkable figure, and now he's been sanctioned by the EU. The Pope said, "Don't be Putin's altar boy." Does the president ever talk about Patriarch Kirill?
I would say no one is safe from our sanctions. We're continuing to review options, but I don't have any to preview today. Go ahead.
Follow up on the sanctions. There seems to be a few holdouts within the EU, especially Hungary, for example, that are not so much on board with especially the oil ban. Is there any effort from the administration to sort of engage at any level on that topic to try to convince or give incentives to those holdouts to sort of get on board with the rest of the EU?
Well, I mean, our view, we of course broadly support Europe's efforts to deny Putin revenue to fund his war with the EU's new proposal, but it will be up to them to finalize. We've taken strong action to ban Russian energy, but we have also been very clear that we have always understood that Europe and many countries in Europe are in different circumstances. So we'll continue to work with a range of countries, and applaud efforts to deny Putin's revenue to fund his war. But I don't have any specific diplomatic engagement to read out here. It just wouldn't be constructive.
The freedom of a woman to choose belongs to her and her alone. In Canada, every woman has a right to a safe and legal abortion, and this government will never back down on defending and promoting women's rights in Canada and around the world. Le libre choix d'une femme appartient à elle seule. toutes les femmes au Canada ont le droit à un accès légal et sécuritaire à l'avortement. Et le Canada, notre gouvernement, ne va jamais reculer dans la défense des droits des femmes ici, à la maison et partout dans le monde.
Vous avez promis d'améliorer l'accès. Qu'est-ce que vous avez amélioré? À quel moment? Pour agir vite?
D'abord, l'année passée, on a investi 45 millions de dollars pour les organismes à travers le pays d'aider et de travailler pour la santé reproductive. On est en train de financer des études pour regarder la réalité de l'accès, qu'on sait n'est pas pareil partout au pays. Et donc, nous sommes en train de regarder exactement ce qu'on peut et doit faire de plus pour assurer que toutes les femmes ont ce libre choix à travers le pays. Et en plus, j'ai demandé au ministre Duclos et au ministre Ian de faire un suivi pour voir c'est quoi le cadre légal qu'on pourrait améliorer, dont on aurait besoin pour assurer que, pas seulement maintenant, mais que sous n'importe quel autre gouvernement dans l'avenir, les droits des femmes soient bien protégés.
Changement d'ici la fin de l'année. Changement d'ici la fin de l'année.
We've moved forward in a number of ways. Last year, we put forward $45 million to help organizations that fight and support women's reproductive rights. We've invested in research and studies that make sure that access, which we know can be uneven for women across the country, is better understood, so we can make sure that all women have full access to the full slate of reproductive services wherever they live in this country. And I also tasked our Minister of Health and Minister of Women and Gender Equality, Ministers Duclos and Ian, in their mandate letters, to look at the legal framework that exists around reproductive health and services like abortion, to ensure that we move forward as necessary on ensuring that, not just under this government, but under any future government, the rights of women are properly protected. Comme j'ai dit, on est en train de regarder ce cadre légal maintenant pour voir comment on peut s'assurer que les droits des femmes vont toujours être respectés. On sait malheureusement, avec ce qu'on voit chez nos voisins du Sud, mais aussi avec ce qu'on voit dans les débats au sein du Parti conservateur du Canada, que nous avons besoin d'assurer qu'il y a des protections pour que jamais on voit ce recul qu'on est en train de voir.
Rapidement, donc, d'ici la fin de l'année?
On a demandé au ministre de le regarder rapidement. On va voir quel sera l'échéancier de leur travail.
Hier, en Chambre, une motion du Bloc pour réaffirmer le libre choix de la femme n'a pas passé. Donc, comment ce serait possible de légiférer, compte tenu que même à l'intérieur de la Chambre, c'est même pas possible de faire adopter une motion pareille?
Malheureusement, une motion unanime comme ça ne passe pas parce qu'on sait qu'il y a des députés du Parti conservateur qui ne croient pas qu'on devrait défendre ces droits, les droits des femmes. Et c'est dommage, mais je peux aussi souligner qu'il y a une majorité de députés dans cette Chambre qui vont toujours défendre les droits des femmes. Et si on a besoin de passer de la législation, on pourra le faire malgré l'objection des conservateurs. Merci.
All right, good afternoon. After we are done here, we will have our guest, which will be the World Food Programme's chief economist, Arif Hussain, and the Food and Agriculture Organization's Director of Emergencies, Rain Paulson. They will be joining us virtually to discuss the launch of the 2022 Global Report on Food Crises. Senior appointment to share with you. Today, the Secretary General is appointing Robert Piper of Australia as a special advisor on solutions to internal displacements. This appointment is a key component of the Secretary General's action agenda on internal displacement. The action agenda will help mobilize collective action and advance solutions for the millions of people who today find themselves displaced within their own countries. The special advisor will ensure strong emphasis on sustainable development. As you know, Mr. Piper has over 30 years of experience in international development, humanitarian response, and peace building at the UN. He's currently the Assistant Secretary General, head of the UN Development Coordination Office in the Secretary General's office. Quick update from Nigeria, where the Secretary General is spending his final day on this particular trip to West Africa. He spent the day in the Nigerian capital, Abuja, and a few minutes ago he spoke to the press after meeting President Buhari. He reiterated the importance of the partnership between Nigeria and the United Nations, adding that the country is a pillar of continental and global cooperation. Turning to the impact of the war in Ukraine on the African continent, the Secretary General said the conflict only makes things worse, setting in motion a three-dimensional crisis that is devastating global food, energy, and financial systems for the developing world. Addressing the issue of global food security, he said he is determined to do everything to facilitate a dialogue that can help bring back the agricultural production of Ukraine and the food and fertilizer production of Russia and Belarus into the world markets despite the war. Earlier in the day, he said he had a meeting with Jean-Claude Brou, the president of the Commission of the president of the Commission of the Economic Commission for West African States, otherwise known as ECOWAS. They discussed the organization's efforts to address a wide range of governance and security challenges in the sub-region, including political transitions in Guinea, Mali, and Burkina Faso. The Secretary General reiterates the UN's support for the work of ECOWAS. And at UN House, the Secretary General took part in a wreath-laying ceremony to honor the memory of 23 of our colleagues and others who died in the 2011 terrorist attack on the UN House in Abuja. And the Secretary General will be starting his migration back home to New York, and he'll be here tomorrow in the morning, I think. And turning to Ukraine, a few updates for you. Our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that the hostilities have been reported in Donetsk, Kharkivska, and Luhansk oblasts in the east as the overall security situation continues to deteriorate. More fighting and shelling is also being reported in southern Ukraine, including in Kherson-Haska Oblast. Missiles reportedly struck power and water stations in Lviv in the west yesterday evening. On the same day, a missile attack on a railway infrastructure in central Ukraine was also reported. It's a major junction for trains evacuating civilians to the western part. Our humanitarian colleagues note that the availability of fuel is... I'm going to ask you to hold for just 2 seconds. I'll be right back. With all due respect. Thanks, James. You may be welcoming me home. All right. Sorry. Just to end up on Ukraine, give you an update of what we've been reaching. We, along with our partners, have reached more than 4.1 million people in need of humanitarian aid and protection to date since the start of this war. As of today, for example, 472,000 people have been reached with cash assistance, nearly $65 million dispersed. Compared with 2 weeks ago, the number of people receiving cash has almost doubled. And as you'll recall, during his visit to Ukraine, the Secretary General stressed the fact that we would be very much scaling up our operations. A joint report released today by UN Women and the NGO CARE shows that after more than 2 months of war in Ukraine, women and minorities are facing immense hardship when it comes to health, safety, and access to food as a result of the crisis. The report notes that women are increasingly becoming heads of households and leaders in their communities as men are conscripted, yet they remain largely excluded from normal decision-making processes related to the humanitarian effort, peacemaking, and other areas that directly impact their lives. UN Women in Care said that with schools closed, high demand for volunteer work, and the absence of men, women's unpaid care burden has increased significantly. Backtracking on gender equality is already evident on the ongoing crisis. The report warns that the war is increasing unemployment with the entire population and will likely push women into the unprotected informal sectors of the economy and increase poverty. Full report is available online. Also, UNICEF said today that at least 1 in 6 UNICEF-supported schools in eastern Ukraine have been damaged or destroyed since the start of the war. The organization says that 2 schools have been hit by attacks in the past week alone. UNICEF noted the start of the academic year in Ukraine was one of hope and promise for children following COVID-19 disruption. Instead, hundreds of children have been killed, and the school year ends amid the closure of classrooms due to war and the decimation of educational facilities. Together with partners, UNICEF is working to reach as many children as possible with safe and appropriate learning facilities. The head of UNESCO, Audrey Azoulay, and the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, today jointly urged for the immediate release of 2 of their staff members who have been detained since early November last year in Sana'a in Yemen. Despite repeated assurances as early as last November by the Ansar Allah Houthi movement that the 2 staff members will be immediately released, their whereabouts remain unknown. UNESCO and the High Commissioner's Office are deeply concerned about their well-being. In this context, the Human Rights Office and UNESCO urge Ansar Allah movement to ensure the well-being of the 2 concerned staff members and to release them without further delay. And on Myanmar, you will have seen that we issued a note to correspondents last night in which a statement from the Secretary General Special Envoy, Noeleen Heyzer, on the consultative meeting of ASEAN's humanitarian assistance to Myanmar. That meeting, which is taking place tomorrow in Cambodia, will be attended by the Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator for the UN, Joyce Msuya. Participants will discuss the escalating humanitarian needs in Myanmar and the obstacles that aid organizations face in reaching vulnerable people with vital assistance. Our humanitarian colleagues said that aid organizations need greater and more consistent access for the delivery of life-saving support to vulnerable men, women, and children, particularly in contested areas in the country's north, west, and southeast. A quick update from the Maldives, where our UN team, led by resident coordinator Catherine Haswell, is doing to help authorities tackle the multiple impacts of COVID-19. We are supporting the national vaccination campaign with nearly 600,000 vaccines having landed in the country so far through COVAX. More than 380,000 people, that's nearly 85% of the eligible population over the age of 12, are fully vaccinated. We have supplied hygiene products to health authorities, help with the safe reopening of schools, work to counter misinformation, strengthen social inclusion, and address mental health issues. We've also worked to help the Maldives diversify its economy, as tourism has been the main driver of economic growth in the country. And lastly, today was the launch of the UN Energy Plan for Action towards 2025. The plan sets out steps for collective action by 30 UN entities and international organizations to achieve the massive pledge they made at the time of the high-level dialogue on energy last year. That commitment included gaining access for 500 million more people to electricity, 1 billion more people to gain access to clean cooking solutions, and the creation of 30 million jobs in renewable energy and energy efficiency, among other targets, all by 2025, which is only 3 years away by my calculations. The aim is to achieve a clean, affordable energy for all by 2030, something that is more crucial to addressing climate emergency and net zero emissions by 2050. In addition, a new Energy Compact Action Network was also launched to match the governments seeking support for their clean energy goals with governments and businesses that have pledged over $600 billion to support these commitments. Through their energy compacts, coalitions were already announced today to support energy access and transitions in Nigeria and for the city of Santiago in Chile, and new partners joined the coalition on green hydrogen. More information available on the interweb. Edie.
Thank you very much, Steph. A couple of follow-ups. Is there any update on any future UN-involved evacuations in Ukraine?
At this point, I just talked to what our colleagues on the ground. Discussions are going on with the various Ukrainian, Russian authorities, and of course, always in cooperation with the ICRC. As soon as we have something that we feel we can safely announce, we will.
Can you say whether these discussions involve Mariupol?
Yes, it involves Mariupol and the Mariupol area.
Secondly, will Nolene Heiser be going to that ASEAN meeting in Cambodia?
No, she will not be attending, and I think I'd refer you to the statement she put out yesterday.
I saw the statement, but it didn't make clear whether she was going to be going.
We rarely try to make things clear for you.
And my question was on North Korea, which fired another ballistic missile today. What is the Secretary General's reaction to this latest of, I believe, more than a dozen ballistic missile launches this year?
I mean, I think this launch, and which comes on top of other launches and other activities that we've seen using ballistic missile technology, only contributes to increasing regional and international tensions. The Secretary General again urges the DPRK to fully comply with its international obligations under relevant Security Council resolutions. Diplomatic engagement remains the only pathway to sustainable peace and complete and verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. James.
Yeah, so on the same two subjects, Mariupol and Myanmar. Let me start with Mariupol. There are some reports that there was another attempt to get a convoy, that a convoy left for Mariupol and was unsuccessful. Can you confirm that? There are also reports that Mariupol, and in particular the steel works, have come under fresh attack. Can you confirm that? And if that is the case, given the humanitarian coordinator briefed us 24 hours ago and said that she believed that there were still civilians and children in the steelworks, if it's under attack, what is the Secretary General's reaction to that? If there are still civilians and children there, does it amount to a war crime?
We have seen the reports of further attacks on the plant. I think, as we have since the beginning, we condemn all attacks that put civilians in danger, that put civilians in danger. I'm not going to go into any detail at this point on further operations or discussions that are going on. I think we all know the delicateness of the situation as it is. When we feel safe that we have something to announce, we will share that with you.
And on Myanmar, what hasn't come out in this, in your statement, is the very basic thing of the Special Envoy herself going to Myanmar. Where are the discussions on that? How likely is that? Has she had any positive signals?
The discussions are ongoing. I mean, I think as soon as there is a hard positive decision, we will announce it. I mean, discussions are ongoing. There's nothing basically to report on those efforts. Alan.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I have a follow-up regarding Mariupol and the Azovstal plant. Our correspondents at the spot were covering the evacuation operation, and they were questioning the people who were leaving the plant. And some of these people, evacuated people, stated that the Ukrainian military at the plant were preventing them to leave the plant, were hiding from them the information about the humanitarian corridors, and even were intimidating them. Is the UN aware of such cases, and do you have any comment regarding these statements by the evacuated people? Thank you.
It's a new ringtone. Never heard that one before. Look, I don't have anything to add to what Mr. Branimir told you yesterday. It is clear that the situation at the plant is horrendous by all account. And I can't confirm the reports that you've given me, but what is clear is that our standing position has always been that people should always be able to choose where they go to and should be free to leave combat zones. And that's exactly what we've been focusing on. Okay, Edward, please go ahead.
Hi, Stefan. I'm back.
So me too.
So my question concerning the defensive weapons, because we know that in the past few months there are a lot of defensive weapons imported into Ukraine, and the Pentagon, they said we don't have a bird eye view of every single tube and can tell you whether it's in the fight or not. Does the UN worried about the proliferation of weapons, because there's a huge amount of weapons now in Ukraine?
Look, our worry is that this war is continuing, right? And that the people paying the highest price are civilians. And the Secretary General was able to see that firsthand in visiting a number of sites around Kyiv. He saw massive destruction of civilian buildings, of civilian infrastructure, traces of mass graves as well. And as he's been pointing out during his trip to West Africa, civilians the world over are also paying the price indirectly. So whatever our focus is on trying to end this war, on the humanitarian, on trying to get civilians out, and as the Secretary General mentioned, I think in his remarks in Nigeria, on ensuring that food and fertilizer, which are a big part of exports of Ukraine, of Russia, and Belarus, are back on the international market. Sorry, Grigory.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Russian Deputy Permanent Representative Ambassador Polanski said today during the Committee of Information that the United States, in fact, has blocked the participation of Russian delegation on the working of such committee by not issuing visas for such delegates, especially Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova has got visa only yesterday, but two other experts have not visa yet. And Ambassador Polanski also urged the Secretariat to take necessary steps to prevent this happening again. So do you have any comment on that? Thank you.
My comment is that this is something we have raised with the host country authorities repeatedly for quite some time, and that we've been discussing it with them directly, and we will continue to raise it with them. It's important that anyone who has business at the UN be allowed to travel to the US to attend those meetings. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stefan. Tomorrow, Thursday, some Israelis mark the anniversary of what is called Israeli independence. Settlers are preparing for a big march that will move from Damascus Gate all the way to Al-Aqsa Mosque. They're calling on their followers to join their ranks in front of the mosque with their flags and music and do dancing in front of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So what is the UN doing? Why Mr. Thorwaldsen didn't say anything? It's happening tomorrow. And many Palestinian factions are threatening if this will go through, they might respond. And then the Palestinian will be blamed for it. Any position on that? Well,
our position remains the same, is that we want to see the status quo as it remains to the holy sites. And we've urged all sides to ensure that there is no provocative action. And that remains our message. And I have no doubt that Mr. Venisland remains in touch with all the parties. Oscar. Oscar?
Stefan, good to see you again. Yes, do you hear me?
I can hear you, sir.
Stefan?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Stefan. Stefan, is there any report about the situation? Still about what's going on about with the people that has been abducted by military forces in Russian territory? Or if there is any report of missing people regarding the casualties and in this war in Ukraine? Because we haven't heard anything about the people who has been forced into Russian territory.
Well,
Is there anything?
I would direct those questions to UNHCR and IOM. On the issue of casualties during the war, the High Commissioner's office, the High Commissioner for Human Rights' office, puts out daily figures, which you can look on their website, which they also say is probably an undercount. James, and then we'll go to our guest.
Yeah, just two further questions. One is back to Ukraine and the achievements of the Secretary-General's trip, because clearly the Mariupol one evacuation we've had was a significant achievement. People got out who wouldn't have got out otherwise. But as well as that, the Secretary-General in Moscow and Kyiv was talking about a bigger initiative, a humanitarian contact group involving Russia, Ukraine and the UN. Can you tell us where that has got to and what is, because it's not been announced, what is the stumbling, which side is the stumbling block?
Listen, I think these, first of all, I think you're very correct that what we saw, the evacuations we saw of Mariupol is something that the Secretary General worked on, first by going to Moscow, and as we put it clear in the readout, that the President Putin had agreed in principle to this, and then, of course, in meetings with President Zelensky, because it's clear that both Ukraine and Russia had to agree to work with the UN and the ICRC to make this a reality, which it was, and I think out of one can almost look as a confidence building measure. We very much hope out of that there will be more formal meetings and structures that will help us upscale our humanitarian delivery.
But he talked about a formal structure.
Yeah,
he proposed a humanitarian
I
contact
understand.
group,
No,
and it doesn't seem to have gone anywhere. And
well,
I wonder why.
I don't agree with the fact that it hasn't gone anywhere. I think things in an active war tend to move in fits and starts and grow organically. I think the fact that all the parties have been able to work through us in a way and through the ICRC, I think is a positive step. And out of that, we hope to build on further.
And my final question is on Libya. While the Secretary General has been travelling, you had another technical rollover by the Security Council, clearly delaying the UN's plans to move on in Libya at this very delicate time. How much of a priority is it now for the Secretary General to find a new SRSG for UNSMIL, given that one permanent member of the Security Council won't approve a new mandate until that person is named?
It is a very high priority, and the other priority is to hope for unity of views on the Security Council to help us implement the mandate and to help improve the lives of the Libyan people.
So, sorry, does that mean the Secretary General believes the mandate needs to become...
No, it's not one of the... I mean, everything is a priority on Libya. On our end, finding an SRSG, and also hoping for unity of the Council. Philippe, and then I will go to the guest.
Thank you, Stefan. Just a last question on Ukraine. Where are you with the idea to create a humanitarian contact group? I think it was in Turkey. Is this group working? Is it...
Philippe, with all due respect, that was the question James just asked 2 seconds ago. But there's been no update since I answered James's questions.
Thank you.
All right, though we try to move quickly.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. please contact us at depictions.media for more information.